Well, Jim, it's now time for It Could Happen to You, where we pick a random question and we read it on the air and we find out either why it hasn't been read on the air or maybe it's a good question. We'll see. Right here, this one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from John Barraclough, Newcastle, England. Jim, ignoring the myriad reasons why you wouldn't, speaking purely hypothetical, if you were offered obscene amounts of money to assemble and regularly perform with a new Midnight Express
good God.
in WWE or AEW, which two current wrestlers would you choose and which promotion would you choose to perform in?
Well, John Bearclaw, I wouldn't put together a new Midnight Express because then they would be compared to the old Midnight Express. And unfortunately, Stan Lane is not in the youthful shape he used to be, and neither is Dennis Condrey, and Bobby's gone. So it would be like New Coke and the new Rolling Stones and, whatever. It wouldn't work. So that's the last thing you do. The last new Midnight Express was not my idea. And this one wouldn't be either. If I was going to put together a tag team or put myself together with a tag team, they would not be called the Midnight Express. Honestly, of existing tag teams, there are two teams that if I was still young enough to do this, interested in traveling, there wasn't a worldwide pandemic going on, and I could afford to take off from what I'm doing now to become a manager again because I'm making more money now than I ever made as a fucking manager. But if all of those things were happening, then I would manage either FTR or Mark and Jay Briscoe. I don't really know of another tag team in existence in the business right now that I would either enjoy or consider that it was that I could help them and or that they were good enough to not spoil my tag team reputation by following, I don't count the new Midnight Express, by following the Midnight Express or the Heavenly Bodies, or even Owen Hart and the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith at that period of time. Honestly, I think the Briscoe brothers in a real wrestling promotion, which that doesn't exist today either, but in any territory, including Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, the Crockett's, or World Class, or Mid-South Wrestling, I think the Briscoes would have drawn you a little bit more money, and I think FTR would have had the best matches with anybody else on the card.
What about a new Stop and Go Express?
Who was that? Bobby Eaton used to be tickled at that. It was Tommy Hagee.
I thought it was Mike Jackson.
I think Mike Jackson and Tommy Hagee. Nick Goulas at one point when one of his attempts to come back and promote wrestling in northern Alabama and somewhere around Nashville. He had a WOW promotion at one point in the late 80s, and George did the interviews for it. But it was all the expresses, rock and roll, midnight, whatever, were hot. So he named Mike Jackson and Tommy Hagee the Stop and Go Express. And it was fucking hilarious to think of them pulling into the goddamn Stop and Go convenience marts. And we're the Stop and Go Express. But anyway.
Do you feel any...
Then let me explain the reason why I say, because the Briscoes can talk their ass off and they have that look. And you can believe that they're not only dangerous men, but that they're fucking psychopaths and that they will hurt you and that they could potentially go into business for themselves. And they're tremendous athletes, but they're not polished classical workers in the traditional pro wrestling sense. The exact opposite is the FTR. They are traditional, polished pro wrestlers in the classic wrestling sense, and they can have great matches with almost anybody except for the Lucha Brothers, because that's so far afield. But their promos, and even though they're badasses, as we've seen one of Cash's little short right-hand Dick Murdoch jabs at the Hall of Fame ceremony a few years ago.
You talk to anyone who's been around Dax, they'll tell you Dax may be the one to be scared of too, yeah.
Yeah, but they don't look like they're mentally fucking ill like the Briscoes do. But at the same time, it's like the difference between Bruiser Brody and Arn Anderson. Bruiser Brody could come in and draw you big money right off the bat because of his reputation and his look and the way that he got over. But it also became a little tiresome because there wasn't a lot of variety. So he'd need to come in and out. With FTR, it's like Arn Anderson. He won't draw you $1 million the first night in, but he will steadily get over with the proper push and the proper opponents to show what he can do, to the point where you'll have a top team and or a top talent in a position that they can hold for several years, because you don't get tired of seeing them as long as you give them quality opponents and you don't do the same thing over and over. So it's two different types of teams and two different types of draws. But that's who I would manage if I was going to manage again. But I'm not going to manage again, so it's a moot point.
And with Heavenly Bodies, obviously, there was a different Heavenly Bodies years before you. That's where you got the name, so there's probably not the sense of pride and ownership over that one as much.
Well, yeah, but and also, see, that's the thing. You can take an idea, but don't make it a copy. The new Midnight Express was ridiculous because everybody remembered the original Midnight Express, and all respect to Bart Gunn and Bob Holly, they couldn't touch as a tag team either set of the Midnight Express, so it wasn't fair to them. It was fucking Vince McMahon is the one that called me about it. I have a feeling it was shit-stained trying to stir things up to make all of us look bad. But the Heavenly Bodies was a nickname of Don and Al Green in the early 70s, and there was absolutely no similarity whatsoever between the Heavenly Bodies of either Tom Pritchard and Stan Lane or Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey and Don and Al Green, besides that nickname, which I liked, and it was 20 years after the fact. So even if they'd have trademarked it, the copyright would have been up after 21 years. So that's why we did that. But it didn't conjure up in anybody's mind the thought of the Green Brothers.
Or Tom Pritchard and Pat Rose.
And since that didn't last...
Managed by Sherry Martel, I think.
Tom Pritchard and Pat Rose in 1985, the Heavenly Bodies in Memphis, managed by Sherry Martel. And they got about 6 weeks of a run, and Tom broke his ankle. And there was that.